and for joining us today. Thanks, Ian. So today's session is all about parenting with ID, but through the lens of the children. So my kids have grown up with ID from when they were, you know, like in Mitchell and Laura's case, they were like 4 and 2, I think, when I developed the ID. So they've truly grown up with it. Bethany was about 19, so she was on the other end of the teenage side, but she still can talk as a child of 2 parents that were really using ID, and how she's then gone into her career and so on with it, and navigated their relationships now with it, which I think will also be really interesting to you guys. What was interesting to me was looking for the people, and then there are other families that have done this, but there weren't really as many as I thought there might have been, and maybe I'm misled, that have used it as extensively with their families, that I could sort of say, was it a language in the family, in the way that the kids were parented and raised and so on. So if any of you have had that experience and you'd like to be, after today's call, you'd like to participate in a similar way, please let me know, because I think this is a very valuable topic to not only the parents, but to the children and, broader families as well. We always start these webinars by checking in on how we're each doing in terms of our own, sense of being in stride. That's what was the start of these webinars when COVID started, was a mechanism to help people navigate life, and especially when you've got challenges. So we're all familiar with COVID, but whether it's COVID or whether it's dealing with, sicknesses that come upon us unexpectedly, or other issues that occur in our family, changing jobs, a lot of people say, well, I'm out of stride because those things have happened. And the real challenge, the more you learn about ID, is how to stay in stride while those things are happening, or regardless of whether those things are happening. And of course, they might knock you a little bit, but you don't have to necessarily fall completely off. You can just maybe wobble a little bit and then get back in stride. And so we have, I'll just show you a slide for those of you who are new, that we use to define this. Can you see, we call this our peak performance indicator. Can you see this slide up on the screen now? Has it come up on the screen?
Yeah, it's there, Paul.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So this arrow up the middle represents your ID. And what it's saying is, when you travel life, when you navigate your life in a way that's consistent with your ID, in stride, as we call it, then you get all the benefits that life has to offer. And there's some of the things that we put at the top of that chart. So your very best performance, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of achievement, your confidence, self-esteem, self-worth are all at their very best and solid and strong when you're in stride, and your health and your energy is really good as well. When you get pulled out of stride, and there are always forces that pull us to the left or to the right, often trying to help us, but not realizing they might be actually trying to help us in a way that doesn't work for us. Those things compromise us getting all the benefits at the top, and they start to put us under stress, which you can see on the horizontal axis there, where the more you're pulled to the left, the more you're pulled to the right, the more that stress increases in its intensity, and it even gets to the point where it takes a real toll on your health. And so we just do a little check-in, and I recommend you do this on a daily basis individually, but in these meetings, we just say, the check-in is on a scale of 0 to 10. If 10 is that you're really in stride on that green line, and a 1 out of 10 is that you're way off to the left or way off to the right, where are you today? What's the number that comes up for you? And many people relate to having a number and saying, yeah, well, the number inside me is a 6, or the number is an 8 or a 4, whatever. We don't have to explain the number. Other people would say, well, it's hard for me to put a number on it. I'd just say, well, I'm in stride or I'm out of stride, or I'm really in stride or really out of stride. Doesn't really matter. It's just a case of checking in and saying, where are you with being true to yourself and at your very best? Because all of us want to show up and be the best version of ourselves each and every day. So this is the diagram we use to represent that. I'm just going to stop this slide now so that I can see the rest of the screen with you guys. And then my question, you might want to put it in the chat, those of you who are open to doing that, is just, on that scale of 0 to 10, what would you say you are? What's your number? So Judy put up, she's a 10. That's nice and consistent, Judy. Good to see. You can just put in whatever number is true for you. There's some high scores there. Thanks, Kira. Bethany, it's good, 6 to 7. They're good scores, guys. 8s, 9s. Susie, 9. They're really high scores. And so that's great that for a lot of you who are on these webinars, you're clearly using a lot of the insights that we talk about and these check-ins each week to keep yourselves accountable. I love your score, Greg. And, you know, I would just recommend that you do this and it becomes part of the language in your ecosystem, whether it's your family or your workplace. It's a great way of just knowing where people are at. The place you want to be at in terms of having the best influence in life across your family, across your colleagues, is an 8, 9, or 10. What we found is that if you're at an 8 and above, you cast a really, you know, influential shadow. And if you are at the other end of the scale, what people might be is really compassionate for you. They'll feel, wow, you've really got something going on. But typically when people are at a 2, 3, or 4, they're ready to invoke some type of change because you're getting to a point where you're so off track that your body and mind are saying, hey, I can't keep going like that. You know, the dangerous scores really are when you sit in the middle. The 5s and 6s and 7s, they're sort of good enough to coast through the day, but they don't let you have that sense of wow and excitement and fulfillment from what you're doing. So there's a lot of insight on our website to help you get to that place of being really in stride. These webinars each week have been a great vehicle to help people check in and stay in stride. But I'd really recommend you think about this model and have it become a part of your, you know, your sort of ritual and your routine, including using these webinars that way. Does anyone have any comments that they want to make about this score? Maybe how they've even, what it's meaning for them to be at a high score so consistently, or what you've done to get there? I just provide a couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions or comments they want to make. Don't be shy. Just jump right in. You might have to take yourself off mute if you've got a comment.
I have a comment, Paul.
Thanks, Judy.
I continue to gain awareness about how much interruptions take me out of stride. That's a really big deal. I'm just gaining more interruptions as a result of having a roommate for the last 3 weeks. It's been very good for me to notice that and to think about how I can handle it differently as you recommended when I do have interruptions.
Oh, that's good. Isn't it so good just to be aware of why, whatever's changing you, why it's happening, instead of other people would experience that something's, you know, they're a bit stressed or a bit out of sorts, but they don't always know why. And they can put it to different, you know, they attach it to different explanations, but you can just nail it straight away. That's really cool. Well done. Anybody else? So what I can tell you, for those who are new today, the average score around the world when we do this is 6.3. And so, you know, the average person, when I say the average person, when you collect all those scores together, that means there's a lot of people getting by in life, doing their thing, but they're not shining, you know, they're not thriving and being the best possible influence they can be in the world. And so not only by you setting that example, like people talk about, you know, confidence and passion and love, and so they're really contagious emotions and a contagious way of being. And if you want to be the best version of yourself, do it for yourself, but also do it for the people around you, because it does become contagious. And when you're living your best life, it does inspire other people to sort of go, you know, I want some of that too. And they'll dig a little deeper to learn more about themselves. So I'd really recommend that to you. Because we've got such an interesting topic today, I might just scoot right along to introduce that topic to you and get into the discussion with Mitch and Bethany, and then Laura will be joining us in about 10 minutes. She's had to do a school run that she couldn't unfortunately get out of this morning. So we'll get started with Mitch and Bethany, and then we'll get into it with Laura when she joins as well. So what I've got the IDs here of everybody, which I'll put up so you can see their IDs. So this is sort of the families, as it were. Well, not our entire family in our case, but I just put up Laura and Mitch. So you can see the mums and dads are at the top, Lynn and myself, and Jeff and Gail in Bethany's case. And then you can see the IDs of Bethany, Mitch, and Laura there. So the nice thing about the group, these three today, is that we've sort of got all drives, pretty much all drives represented, and it's I think going to allow for the audience on the call to ask questions from all different angles and hopefully make for some rich insights. So you might just want to take a screenshot of this ID, because I won't keep it up so that we can see you on the screen and interact with you. But you can see Laura's 7373, Mitch is 3675, and Bethany 5537. And the first thing I would call out is you can see that those IDs are really different to their parents. For those of you who are new to ID, there's no correlation genetically. It's like a thumbprint, a mental thumbprint. The chips just fall where they do, and you love your kids, no matter what shape and size they are, and that includes their ID. Doesn't mean that it's easy or automatic that their way jives with your way. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about on our call today. So a place to maybe start is to just ask Mitch and Bethany to maybe intro, what you recall of learning about your ID, and just maybe how old you were or first memories of it, and just what it's been like sort of growing up with the language of ID around you.
Start with Bethany.
Yeah, Bethany, would you like to share yours?
Absolutely. So as Paul said, I was 19 when I got my ID. My mum first became involved with ID when I was 15. And for those of you who have had teenage children, I'm sure you understand that 15 is quite a special age where you know pretty much everything. And the last thing you want to do is be involved with whatever your parents' latest, greatest, fantastic thing is. And that was me with ID. I just did not want a bar of it. I think my ID contributed to that, because there was no way that anyone was going to put me in a box. I don't belong in boxes. I'm a 5537. So I didn't want to be defined. I wanted to be my own person, and I had absolutely no interest. My dad would have got his ID around the same time. And I think my mum probably knew in many senses that I was more like her than like dad, but also that I wasn't quite like her either, that I was just a bit different. And in hindsight, I understand that that's why she wanted me to get my ID done and to have that understanding of myself. But at the time, I just wasn't ready. I just wasn't on that page. I was too teenage, and I just wasn't interested. And I ended up getting it done. I ended up working for mum, and I still work for mum. And all of the staff had their ID done, and there was someone else getting theirs done at the time. And so I was asked to fill in the questionnaire at the same time, and it didn't in that space feel so much like something my parents were wanting me to do as just something that we did as a team to understand each other and to work better together and to use each other's strengths and help each other in our vulnerabilities. So I guess that was my first encounter and how it sort of came about.
Your mum probably had the whole team done just so she could get your ID done, Bethany. That's probably the truth of it.
That would not surprise me, Paul. Would not surprise me at all.
Thanks, Bethany. Mitch, what about for you?
Well, yeah, about, I don't know, I didn't even know how old I was when I first did it.
I think you were 6 or 7.
So at 6 years old, yeah, I don't sort of really recall too much about it, which I don't know if you recall, but later on in life, it then annoyed me because it was like I want to redo my ID because I don't think it's, I didn't think it was going to be valid, the fact that I did it at 6 years old, thinking it, not so much it would change over time, but you'd understand the questions a little bit better. But yeah.
You did redo it. Do you remember that?
I don't think it changed too much.
Didn't.
But yeah, so the first counter of ID is basically, it's back to when I can remember. And it's the 5th child in our family, as we always call it, because it basically comes up in pretty much every dinner, just not necessarily talking directly about ID, but, you know, whether it be talking about, you know, how someone's days are going or whatever it might be, you can sort of then see how it's affected by their ID or, you know, whether in or out of stride. So, but yeah, that's what, that's just to keep it sort of brief for that first talking point.
Yeah. And as you guys look back now, for how would you sort of explain your experience with ID? Like, what has it meant to you in terms, and how have you sort of used it? Just give it maybe a bit of an overview of, how you've used it and what you've gained from it, or what it means to you to have known that for the last, whatever, in your case, 25 something years, and similarly for you, almost, Bethany, 20 years maybe for you.
For me, I think the standout was at uni. When I went to uni, I just remember there's a couple of the two instances that stand out most was I was a good student, and my friends knew I was a good student, and fellow students knew I was a good student. And I did an assignment once, and I did it in 3 sittings. Absolute mistake. I got 15 out of 30 for that assignment, and I'll never forget it. The teacher wrote 15 out of 30 good effort, and I took it back to him and I said, either it's 15 out of 30 or it's a good effort. It cannot be both. And we had a little conversation about it, and I still maintain it wasn't a good effort, but it was at that moment that I realised I needed to stay true to me. I have a very good sense of the last minute. I work at the last minute. I trust myself on the last minute. And to put that 15 out of 30 in context, I was the top female graduating student of my year in my course. So 15 out of 30 is not on my vision at all. I don't do 15 out of 30. And in that moment, I just had that real understanding, it's okay to be like this. You work best like this. You've tried it someone else's way. It was a clear failure. Don't do it again. And I hadn't.
Good lesson.
Yeah, so that was the first memory I have of uni and my ID playing out. And the second was I was talking to another good student who also did well, and we collaborated a bit. And she was talking to me about an assignment that was due in 2 weeks. And she said, I was just wondering what you think of question 3. And I just looked at her and said, I didn't even know there were 3 questions, because I hadn't looked at it. I wasn't going to look at it. I was going to look at it when my last minute trigger kicked in, because that's when I look at things. And then and so in there I started to be true to myself. I'm the same at work. I can't actually get anything done until there's pressure, until I feel it needs to be done. And I really try to be different to that sometimes if I feel it's going to benefit other people, but I can't put a fake deadline on myself. They don't work. I know they're fake. And it has just really trusting myself and trusting that just is how I am has made such a big difference, like from uni, through work, through adulthood. One of my favorite jobs I've ever had was when I worked in a call center, and I got trained on every single thing in the call center, so that when there was a queue in a line somewhere, they could just flick me over to it. I didn't care. I didn't need warning. I was happy with the excitement. Oh, look, it's this type of call now. And so I just really used that to play my idea to play to the needs of the business, but it was using my strengths, and it gave me greater joy because it was less boring than taking the same sort of call all day, every day.
Yeah. How cool to have known all that all the way through, and to trust yourself. I mean, it sounds like it's kept your confidence up all the way through, because you've known who you are, and that's fine to be like that. Yeah. That's cool, Bethany. Thank you. Mitch, what about for you?
I'll just acknowledge, Grant, your question first, but I'll come back to it. But that's a great question. So for me, knowing ID, first of all, getting to the sort of teenage years, similar to a teenage daughter, I got a little bit, not so much rebellious, but there was a part of me that really wanted to be at a point where I wish I was living life without ID. More so at the time, just the fact that your parents knew you better than you knew yourself. To put it bluntly, it sort of just, it was one of those things as a teenager, you sort of, think you know everything, and so you want to know yourself better than anyone else. So, but now as sort of you come through life, get a bit more mature and all that sort of stuff, it's definitely, obviously with schooling and all that sort of stuff, it has been very helpful. And now it's funny that I only watch my own children now and start working out what they are to start working with it and playing with it, like similar to what mum and dad did all them years ago. You either do things to try and help your kids along, or you sort of test them just to have that little bit of experimental fun. So when it came to through schooling, being I was similar to Bethany in terms of the pressure side of things. At that sort of age, I wasn't really toying with it or whatever, but I definitely left every assignment to the last minute. Even one memorable one was for HSC, stayed up to, I think it was about 5 a.m. to finish off a major project for the HSC, and, you know, had an hour's sleep and then off I went to school. And it was I actually did all right in that assignment, you know, similar to Bethany, like, you know, not similar, but looking at scores or marks of your projects, I was always a 65% sort of a kid, except for 2 subjects that I actually really enjoyed. One being maths, that I ended up being highest in my grade for. It was only general maths, but for that, because there's only one answer. There's not beating around the bush, any sort of, you know, English where you can write a million things about how Rapunzel threw her hair down off the tower. It was just 2 + 2 = 4. So between that and industrial technology, being, you know, wood tech, hands-on. So both of those subjects I did really well at. The rest of them I was a 65% student. So but I guess knowing a bit about my ID helped me to not really get too annoyed about those marks. You know, I actually took it as a positive, but at least I wasn't failing. So, but and then, you know, as I've moved into sort of career, not so much my early days of career, that those careers didn't really. Oh, actually, they did sort of occur. Like, I did sort of perform better under pressure, but I was I would cruise unless I was under pressure, and found no need to work quickly or anything like that. But now, working in more of a management role, I play with it almost on a daily basis. You know, like, my days are a lot better, a lot more successful if I'm under pressure. And the way I then work with that is, if I don't feel like I've got a lot on the other day, I at least need to then get a list drawn up. So I've then got items to tick off to then move into a pressure situation, versus it being just rock up to work and do what I have to do for X amount of hours and go home. It's not, I don't like doing it that way. I even wake up better and get out of bed a lot better when I know I've got plenty to do. So, yeah, I do play with it on a daily basis when it comes to that. So, to sort of then lead a little bit into Grant's question about, how did I sort of use ID for relationships? Big time, especially from girlfriend and now wife, huge. Being high in the complete drive for both of them. I have the complete drive is high for me, but I still have. I'm not sure how it sort of works with my ID, but I still can work, obviously, last minute. I can bounce around left, right, and centre if I need to. But knowing that both my partners have been like, no, it's like list, it's schedule, it's calendar, it's all that sort of stuff. At times, by knowing sort of where, or firstly, A, that they have an ID, B, what their ID is, has allowed me to be a lot more just understanding to make sure I do meet their needs and work within what they need versus what I do, because I can bounce around. So that's how I found it with that. Also with mates, just, I don't necessarily know all their IDs, but at least, again, to know that they've got an ID, I can start to get an idea of what their strongest drives might be, and therefore I can then see that playing out with, whether they rock up on time, rock up late, how they, go out for dinner, how they, I don't know, how a night might play out with them. So, I found knowing my ID and then understanding that there is the instinctive drive quite important for relationships.
Thanks, Mitch. And Laura Marie, thanks for joining. Welcome to the call.
No worries.
We're just talking about your intro to ID. You might just want to share for the group, what are your sort of early recollections of learning about your ID, and what's it sort of meant to you to know it over the years, given that you've grown up with it for almost your entire life?
Yeah, okay. So, well, obviously, like, I remember, things happening back when I was I think I was like in probably year one, when it all sort of was starting in the background. And then I remember, I think the first real memory I have is I was in year two and I was called out of class to go down to my principal's office to sit there with her to do my ID. So I actually did my ID in my primary school principal's office, who was a nun. But she was also quite, she was a big part of the start of it all. So she sat with me and we went through each question, obviously, asked me in a way that a child would understand. So I guess that was the whole premise of her doing it and not sitting with mum or dad. So that was my sort of introduction to it. And I don't think it really changed anything while I was a kid. I don't think I really had any knowledge of, at that age of what it all meant. But obviously for mum and dad, it was really helpful and probably, clarified a few things. I probably, once you're at an age where you're starting to understand it, I guess, and because mum and dad were talking about it all the time and using that language, it just kind of becomes like a second language that you gradually just pick up on as if you're learning English. And then obviously, once you sort of have an idea of, the rest of the family members and things like that, it becomes a little bit clearer as to, why people do things the way they do. And, obviously, we were, I think we're all completers except for dad. So, and well, but like me, Mitch, mum, we were, so then once my younger brothers, but I guess once it got to an age that dad was different, insofar as, was fly off the seat of his pants kind of, no plan and everything like that, it was helpful to understand why.
Why I frustrated you.
Yeah. No, but that
frustrated or frustrated.
So then as life has gone on, it's just been I don't know, it's just become a thing that's just always there and usable all the time, whether it be that someone's ID or whether you could just have an ID. Like I look at my own kids now and they're they're 6 and 3, and I've got you start getting an inkling as to what that might be, but it helps you parent them or understand them, even just having a sense. So that's, I don't know if I've answered the question.
When did you recall first starting to use it, darling? In terms of when you knew of it and knew the language, but when did you sort of start to maybe, I don't know whether own it's the right word, but where you sort of own it about yourself and then start to use it advantageously?
I don't know, I was probably in maybe high school. Okay. You sort of start kind of what Mitch was just saying before about what are they called? Assignments and things like that. Or if it wasn't, or even if it was now in hindsight, when I look back in hindsight, but I don't know, it's hard to, it's like looking at a photo and going, oh yeah, I remember that, but actually you just remember the photo, you don't remember. So it's really hard for me to kind of pinpoint it, but it was, if anything, it was definitely high school age. Probably more late high school as well. And then, once sort of started working career, then it kind of is, really, I think comes into play when you're starting to work with different people and, they do things differently to you. That's when it really, I guess you kind of, your maturity escalates, because it's you feel like you've got a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing better than they do.
Yeah.
And you can work with them better.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So I might just open up to the group here. I'm sure there's questions that particularly other parents might be really interested to ask for what you can learn from, you know, Bethany, Laura, and Mitch for your own children. I've got other questions I can walk through, but given that we only have 30 minutes, there might be a whole bunch of topics you guys are interested to explore. So has anyone got a question they'd like to lead off with? I'm sure there is. Jose, fire away.
To what, when kids are in that rebellious, got to find my own space and so on, and they're working through, when we've all done this, we've gone through that who am I really stage, which is in that teenish sort of space. To what degree can we use this to sort of say, without saying no it isn't, this is a way that you can manage some of those mental health issues that sort of become, I don't know, multiplied out to look much bigger than they really are. Because that seems to be, with my kids, what the main focus is that, oh, I've got this mental health issue, I've got that mental health issue. And it's really, to me, it's, everyone has mental health issues. Hello, it's all about being human. But it's about what are the strategies we've got in place to turn those mental health issues either into things we work with really well or things that we control so that they don't bring us down.
I didn't go through a rebellious stage. I don't know what you're talking about.
How do you deal with your mental health, Laura?
Oh yeah, wine.
I think it comes down to a stage of, especially with teenage years, is the ball really needs to just be left in their court, but know that you're there with a greater understanding for when they do want to come to you for it. So if, I'm not sure if, say, the teenage kids, you know, say have done their ID by this point, but it might be a case of, look, I've got some strategies that might be able to help you. You know, because you're not going to go to them in the heat of, you know, an argument or something like that. They're going to completely rebel. But at least if they know that that's there, they might then stew on it a bit and then come and see you at a time when they are calm and they're actually open to listening to what you might have to offer.
Bethany, what about for you? What would you say?
The thing I'd add to that is, so we've discussed a little bit from a couple of different teenage perspectives about being a teenager. But the thing that I'd say is teenagers, I think it can be, I'm not a parent, but I watch a lot of parents and I have been parented. And I think it can be a really hard transition for parents from children going from children and 100% reliant and then starting to find themselves and want independence and want that space and not wanting to be crowded. And I think the biggest thing I would suggest, and that was helpful for me in my teenage years, is whether they be my parents or other adults, actually asking what I want in that time. So if you've got kids talking about this mental health issue or that mental health issue, ask them if they want to talk to you about it. Ask them how that sits with them. Ask them how they feel about that. Ask them if they want help with it. And if they do they want your help or someone else's help? And let them lead it, because that's part of finding yourself. And then if they do want your help, that's absolutely fantastic. But it's that really tricky balance of not being overbearing and trusting who they are and their way. And I know with ID we talk about bias and that we just have a natural belief that everyone does things the way we do, even though we know that's not true when we look around and see our families and whatever else. And we have a natural belief that people think the way we do, and we also know that's not true when we look around and see people, like I say, even in our immediate family, but further afield. And I'd say let them lead that and be there and try and work with them their way, not your way.
At the end of the day, they are a teenager, and so it's sort of, I think, yeah.
Still having boundaries.
Trying to put two, but they sort of almost just need to live those couple of years, because at the moment they're all, well, got to be careful about how I say this, but in terms of mental health is becoming such a topic that sometimes it's a bit too easy to talk, like to say that that's an issue, versus They might just be a teenager, and just it's the struggles that Dad's been through, I've been through at my age. At the time, we just didn't give it a name, and maybe it is. I don't know a lot about it. Maybe that is the actual illness, but at that time, they just need to be a teenager. They need to slam the door shut, go in their room, cry, whatever. Doesn't mean they've necessarily got something, because then if they give a name to it, then they're going to maybe get more down about the fact that they've now got something versus they're just a teenager.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, if that's the awareness as well, that, like, say for me personally, that where I was becoming more aware of my ID and why I do things, and so you're going to butt heads more because you're you know that you've got your way of how you want to do things, and when your parent is different and they're trying to parent you and keep you in those boundaries, but you're at an age now you can make up your own mind about things, do things your own way. You know, say as an argument, like an argument could be, you know, about a school assignment, and, you know, you're like, well, you need to get it done, and, you know, it might be 5 weeks out from when it's due, but their ID might be that they work better when it's like the night before. So it's like, well, back off them, you know, if that is not going to be their thing, and you know that from their ID they're actually better working under pressure, then don't harp on it, and that'll save that you know, argument that's unnecessary, really, as an example.
And if they haven't done their ID, it's where this is something you can toy with.
Yeah,
you can do
well,
that,
like
and see if they still get it done, but under their own.
Yeah.
There's some really good questions in that. Sorry, go Trace.
Well, I was just thinking with mental health, I think it's such an interesting, like, one of the things that comes up for me, and maybe it's obvious, is for adults with mental health, you talk about the peak performance, right? And you talk about what do you need to be at your best. And so I think mental health issues in an adult happen often when our needs aren't met, right? Like, so there's lots of different mental health issues, but and some are not all ID related, but, you know, environmental or all of those things. But I think for teenagers, there's also this question of what needs do they have that aren't being met, right? And how do we tap into those to help their mental health, right? And some of them aren't always in that realm. But I was wondering, have you talked about the work you did with kids with like ADHD and the impact? Because I think that relates to the mental health piece. Like, did I miss? I was a couple minutes late. Have you talked to that?
No, I have not talked about that, Trace. No, and that's probably a great topic for another you know, webinar as well, because that's not something we can really probably do justice to in a couple of minutes. But it's a great call out, and it would be a good thing to do. So there's some really interesting questions in the chat, you guys, around the impact from Leonie, the impact that ID had in terms of tailoring communication style. Did you notice that? Do you find that that's relevant for you too, Bethany? You know, do you see the comment in the chat from Leonie about how much impact did tailoring the communication style for each ID help you? Did you notice that from your parents, Bethany?
I don't know that I got it from my parents. I've spoken briefly about this here in a couple of other of the Zooms previously, but I believe that Authenticate is often, I call it the communication drive. It's where I see most communication miscommunications occur between user authenticates and avoid authenticates, because there's such a difference between literal speak and what I call fluffing around speak. And I don't mean any offense by that, because I can fluff around with the best of them.
Offense taken.
But my mum is avoid authenticator, my dad is an authenticator, and I'm a 5, so I'm not driven either way in that drive. I just don't have it. And I've often found myself pre-ID, and I'm a lot more aware of it post-ID, is I translate between my parents, because I understand what my dad's saying or what my mum's saying, even though, and I see that the other one hears something entirely different. So I can just get in there and translate it into their language. No, what dad means is, or no, dad, what mum says, and I can just say it directly rather than her less direct.
So you haven't so much found it something you've tailored for you. It's been more you playing that mediator in your family. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's honestly like they speak different languages, but it sounds more or less like English to everyone.
Right. What about for you, Laura? How would you respond to that question?
I don't know, like, because I guess it's like from what angle though, in terms of tailoring the communication? Was it the communication between kids or parents? Like, is it the communication with parents? Because I think,
I guess, did you feel like there was a tailoring? Like, did I or mum, for that
The
matter,
parents'
take it? Do you
perspective.
feel like we took a different approach depending on?
probably
You know-
sometimes probably not in the heat of the moment, but if given the opportunity to actually sit back and think, and I know I do it with my kids as well, like in the heat of the moment, you're just like, wow. But then, you know, if you actually have a chance to, you know, stop, think, okay, hang on, why are they doing this? And, you know, like what we were saying before, you know, they're wanting their independence and to kind of follow their instincts, is then communicating it differently. So I think there was sometimes, like if your mum had the opportunity to, you know, take a step back, you would definitely come in from a different angle, and then it's received better as well. And there's not that, you know, like argy-bargy retaliation from me, because you know, as Trace said, your needs are being met.
Yeah.
So, definitely there were times, and likewise, when you sort of, me as a parent now with my kids, there are times, like I know now that if I say with Oliver, who's 3, if I say no, like that's not going to, like I have to tell him, you know, we're not going to do that but you can do it another time, and he's fine as long as he knows it's, you know, can happen another time, but it's tailoring it differently to fulfill his needs. So yeah, definitely helps.
What about you, Mitch?
For me, or similar to what Bethany was saying, more so nowadays, in terms of, I know other people, especially if they haven't done their ID, they won't tailor how they speak to me, I guess, to either dumb it down or whatever it might be, especially with the Authenticate drive. But so I, therefore, if I am not, say, in a rush or whatever it might be, and I do have time to digest it, I'll tailor what they've said. It's almost like I can make anything sound what I want here, but you know, if especially from a relationship point of view, you know, in the heat of the moment, if something gets said or whatever it might be, instead of me just getting frustrated, I'll sort of try and digest a little bit and try and understand a little bit more of what it might have actually meant versus like just taking for what I actually heard.
Okay. And then what about the question from Grant, which I think is a great question, about, you know, how having IDs as the foundation for our family. What coping strategies do you have for family challenges? So
we haven't had any family challenges.
So
it's been a Dad sort of has
had
been
our fair share, don't lie.
Dad has probably been at the coxswain of the ship kind of thing, like steering it through challenges. And so I've actually sat back and watched it, and it's been interesting to see how it plays out. And like Dad does excel with it all because it's under pressure, and obviously then there's many other things that aren't ID related as to why. But it's interesting to see how everyone sort of plays their role with it. And I think Dad's is probably the more dominant one in terms of under pressure, making things happen.
Look, I guess, because Dad's the improviser. Like Dad, you know, of the parent, Dad's the improviser. So when it comes down to crunch time and there's something that, you know, Dad's automatic response is to like, and I guess we all sit back because we know that Dad's going to be the one that sort of jumps in, and that's where he kind of excels. And
Jace obviously is right there to sort of almost be similar, you know, as a backup. But then for us, it's not saying that we all couldn't do it. They're obviously the first ones to do it, or it's in their nature. I'm probably somewhat similar, but then obviously with the complete drive, it's a lot more like, hang on, let's just get all the eggs sorted before we go to the chook yard sort of thing. Like, you know, like just not panic, a bit more of a get everything in line. to then tackle these challenges. So that's, yeah.
And when we've had, if we've ever had the times that we've needed round table family discussions and things like that, I guess subconsciously, in a way, ID comes into a play. It doesn't necessarily, the conversation isn't sat there and purposefully, angled because of ID. But I think at the end of the day, when everyone's having their bit to say, it's just a level of understanding as to where everyone's coming from and why, and giving people that space as well. So like it could be even so whereas instead of things happening and reacting to them, it could be that we don't react because we know that that particular family member, that would be too much for them or whatever. So that's.
I would say that I see two scenarios here. One is what I'd call the what you think of as a challenge. Like we have had some serious health issues with the kids. Mitchell, when he was 6, got diagnosed with a form of leukemia. Sam, when he was 16, we had emergency brain surgery. And then we've had, situations with losing parents and other things that have been challenging, not to mention even some challenging times with business or, in my case, a marriage breakdown recently that, we've had to sort of rally around. And, I think we just have a way of having the ID there means everyone will react differently in different ways. And instead of judging everyone based on there being a set way, everyone's just got the freedom to react the way that comes naturally to them. Because I notice the kids are all different. And the area that I think plays out big time for me as a dad in the family is just being around the family table, having dinner. Whilst you wouldn't think of that as a challenge, but where it could be a challenge is if some kids are like dominating more than others, it would be very easy for a child that's maybe quieter to feel inferior or not contributing as much or whatever. But I think because the kids understand their IDs, everyone just accepts that they've got a different contribution to make to the family unit. And I feel like everyone's comfortable with that and feels good self-esteem about that, rather than someone feeling like there is a way that they should be and they're not living up to that or something, So that challenge doesn't really present itself. What about in your case, Bethany? Is there something you'd like to share for your family?
Yes. So the thing that Mum and I are both in the minute sort of people. And so if there's any conflict or issues or whatever, Mum and I just want them dealt with now. But the older I get, the more I'm learning that Dad can't deal with it now, that trying to deal with it now actually just makes it worse for him because he doesn't have that time to think, that time to process, that time to analyze, that time to do all the things he needs. And so where possible, and I certainly don't always get it right, I do try and come at it from could we talk about this tomorrow? Or I've got this, this has come up. Can we have a chat about it next week? Or could you think about it and see, find a solution? But I try not to ever pressure him for that now, because I know I can ask Mum for it now and she'll be okay. And either of them can ask me for it now and that'll be fine. But it just doesn't work that way for Dad. And it's not fair to, just because there's 2 of us and 1 of him, to say that our needs are more. It's not, it doesn't, we all have needs. So I'll raise it now because that's my need, and then look for a solution next week or tomorrow or whatever to try and accommodate his needs as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And Grant, the question you raised here about how you lean on each other's strengths, I'm really interested for Laura and Mitch, particularly where you've got the benefit of, other siblings. Do you feel like there's different strengths and vulnerabilities and you lean 100%. On each other for those differences?
Yeah, 1000%.
Yeah.
Even if one of the things that I was thinking about just before is, and obviously, you can talk all day about ID, but even coming down to having a happy household, growing up, and even now, but say being in a family of completers, I wasn't necessarily clean and tidy, but I could tell if, say, for instance, more so Mum and Laura were almost getting a little bit out of stride just because they'd have SH1Ts, but that would be then my time to sort of then go, okay, like if mum sort of get upset or whatever like that, I knew, okay, it was time to help around the house or whatever it might be, whether it be clean the kitchen. And once then the house was, say, tidy, it just felt like the household just became a little bit more in harmony. And it's very much the same today. Like, you know, yeah, it is. It's just, and it might just, that might not be just an ID thing. It could be a mother thing or a lady of the house sort of, you know, in terms of wanting a nice home. But it definitely is something that by knowing the ID, it was like I knew what their needs were to at least, well, not so much Laura, but mum, I'd accommodate to her to make sure that she was, you know, then happy. And I've seen it in recent years too, when, say, an example was putting on Christmas and a lot of things happened last minute under pressure and all the family was there and they're all wondering why it's stressful. And I stood there and I actually had a little bit of a chat to my aunties because I just knew it wasn't in mum's best interest the way it was all unfolding. And so I jumped in to really, I guess, pull back the reins and bring it back to a controlled situation that to try and, you know, I guess make things then better for mum. So.
Yeah. What about you, Laura?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's more so now as adults that I find myself, you know, calling it, depending on, you know, what's required for advice, different people, because I know they each have.
What do you never call me?
Ideas when I need something. No, but you know, if there's a, you know, I find that, yeah, sometimes I can have really good conversations with them when I know that they're going to give me the feedback that I need for a particular situation. I can't think of an example right now, but, you know, yeah, there might, I don't know, there's just things that happen that I'll call Jace, you know, if I, you know, it's like, you know, I don't know, business related or, yeah, there's just different situations that, yeah, I'll call on one of the boys. It's not like, which means that we kind of have strong relationships with each other because we're not sort of favoring one person. I guess it's probably also the flip side. Like they'll call me, you know, being the only girl, if there's like almost, you know, or female things to talk about or some, you know, or because I'm the eldest, you know, advice over something, but they'll call Mitchell or each other for something else, you know, because of Mitchell's strengths and vulnerabilities. So it definitely happens. And it, I guess it, our relationship's stronger and kind of fair across all of us. We don't have favorites or anything like that. Well, I do, but I don't. Yeah, no,
Full pack of bolters, Laura.
Yeah, I definitely think we lean on each other.
Yeah, I see it. You know, and I think it's nice that everyone can be their individual self, and no one feels, to your point about, you know, a favorite or not. You know, at least you don't tell us about it. Yeah. So Tracy asked a really interesting question. I'd be curious for what the three of you would say about this. What are the risks of knowing about ID from a kid? Like there is the risk of being labelled or constrained, or someone maybe knowing you more than what you thought. So do you see a downside or a risk element to knowing ID as you're growing up and growing through?
I think it largely depends on the wisdom of the parents and the adults who know the ID and their understanding around drive versus behaviour. And it could potentially, again, depending on the adult, add a layer of judgment. You shouldn't be doing that, your ID says, rather than potentially coming at it from a questioning point of view. Oh, that's curious. I wouldn't have expected that from that ID. Right. So I think it's more around those things. I don't know that it's intrinsically different from labeling a child naughty when actually their issue was boredom.
Yep.
So I think it's
really
potentially around labeling and again, that bias. My bias is verifiers behave like this, or when verifiers combined with complete, they really should be doing this, and not allowing them to express their ID the way they do it. I've got a friend who's a very, very strong completer, and you wouldn't picture it. You wouldn't really get it until you knew his mother, because his behaviours are so against, just don't look like traditionally a completer in inverted commas. I am 100% confident his mum is probably, I don't know, a 1 or a 2 on complete. And he does as was always done. He does exactly what his mum did. So he doesn't look like a completer, but he is. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Some interesting points there. I'll finish off with Laura, what would you say?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, I guess the only thing would be, is almost like being pigeonholed in, like, effectively exactly what Bethany was saying.
Because it's going for another.
I think there's more benefits knowing than, and being able to, work with your children based on that than the risks. I think the benefits far outweigh the risks.
Okay.
Yeah, I almost at the start was going to say that there's no risk, like it's almost a no-brainer, until obviously once you girls are starting to say those things, it also takes us back to the start where it's like, at the end of the day, just let the kid be a kid to a certain extent too. And knowing, once you know the full idea of the ID, it also comes down to your onion layers. So it's, it's all good and well to say you've got the ID, but then you've got your external influences, like you're talking about with the stride as well, that they might not be acting like that at the time. So just let them be. But and again, just use it in times of when you can calmly talk to them about something versus it being at the heat of the moment going, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not your ID.
I think it makes a really good point that if people are going to use ID, and whether it's in your relationship or whether it's with children or, in your team, using ID isn't just about using the bar chart and the 4 drives. It's about understanding the underlying principles of ID, which is that there is, like the drive versus behavior point that Bethany mentioned earlier in her comment, that not going to judgment, that there is a thing about people being in stride and out of stride. So when people are showing up the way they are, instead of judging that and labeling that, you can sort of go, maybe they're not as in stride. Let's have a conversation about that. So I think the power of ID is in the conversations that it provokes for you with, the people that you care about, rather than giving you the sort of intelligence to jump to conclusions about things. I think that's the danger, is when we know enough to be jumping to conclusions as opposed to knowing enough and staying curious and provoking the conversation. I think that's, and then meeting needs through that process. I think, guys, we're just about out of time today. That just skated by really quickly. But I just want to say thank you to Bethany and to Laura and Mitch for sharing your hearts and your vulnerability and just your experience, because raising kids, as you guys are starting to find now for yourselves, in Laura Mitchell's case, I know their situation well, it's guesswork, isn't it? You just, when they're little, I mean, Judy asked the question before, how old can kids be before they do their ID? We typically find it's about high school age, because they need to understand themselves enough to be able to answer the question, let alone understand the questions. But, all the way through those early years and even into teenage years, it's guesswork. And so having your feedback through the lens of children around what it meant for you, some of the comments are just really helpful and very validating, I think, for those parents who are still navigating that journey. So thank you for giving up time today. Thanks, everyone, for being on the call. It's really awesome to see you here all the time and to be as interested in such a special topic. So have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.